Welcome everyone to episode 7 of this Ultimate Excel Dashboard tutorial series. This is the episode so many of you have been waiting for. Today we're gonna build this beautiful interactive and collapsible settings menu that has two different types of fully functional buttons in it. The radio buttons that allow you to choose between 4 different color themes for your dashboard with only one click, and these smooth toggle buttons inspired by modern UI design that allow you to control the visibility and functionality of specific dashboard elements, like in this example of the info and tab buttons. It will be a huge tutorial, but I thought it makes sense to build this entire settings menu at once. So without further ado, let's get right into it. For those new to this tutorial series, the basic Ultimate Excel dashboard is available for free download on excelfind.com. And on there you will also find the VBA code that we will create in this tutorial. Link is in the description. And the Excel version used in this tutorial is just the latest Excel version, which is available in Office 365. For this huge settings menu feature, we will start by creating the settings button and the settings menu area. For the settings button, we're gonna make use of the Excel integrated icon library that you get with Office 365. In there we simply search for the word settings and get this nice icon as a result. So let's select and insert it. Once it is inserted, we adjust the size of the icon. And after that, we right click on it and click on Format in order to change the fill to white. And we also add a borderline for this icon, also with the color white, and a width of 1. This borderline is really important as we will use the fill transparency property later in the VBA script to make this button change its appearance from active to inactive, just like this. For the inactive state, we set the transparency to 100% to make it seem like it has no fill. And then we place it in the header bar right next to the dashboard title. For the settings menu area, we're gonna start off with inserting a simple rectangle. Slightly adjust the proportions, and then set the fill to white and remove the line. Then as second element, we insert a triangle and place it on top of that rectangle, so that it will be pointing towards the settings button later when we bring it into position. We also remove the line here and set the fill to white as well. And then just reposition it in a way that there is no space between the rectangle and the triangle. Then, as last step for this basic settings menu area, we will add all the titles for the button areas in it. We will have 3 button areas in total, and for the titles we just use simple text fields. The first one will be for the color theme buttons. We make the text bold, slightly increase the font size, and change the font color to a dark gray. Finally, we align it to the middle, bring it into the correct position, and of course remove the line and fill of this text field. Then for the other 2 titles, we simply duplicate the first one and change the text to tabs visibility and info button visibility. And to make them all be consistently aligned, we select all 3 of them and align them to the left. Maybe move that one a bit up. Wonderful. Before we start writing the first VBA script, let's create the first group of button objects, which will be the group of 4 radio buttons for the theme color control. Just for those who don't know what a radio button is a button within a group of buttons that allows the user to choose only one option at once. The button shape will be a rounded rectangle. We insert this shape down here for the moment and make it really big so that we can adjust the roundness. Then we set the fill to this green tone and the border to black. And once that is done, we size it down to the actual wanted button size to make it fit into the settings menu area. Now this green fill is for the active state of the button, and with a darker fill color like this dark green, we want the text color to be white. Then we set the font size to 10 and give that button a name. It will be the button to activate theme number 1. To make this text perfectly aligned to the center and the middle, we use these text alignment options up there. For the other radio buttons, we duplicate that first button 3 times, bring the new buttons into a feasible position, and adjust the button text accordingly. And now that we have a better feeling for these button sizes, let's quickly readjust the settings area titles and buttons to get a better spatial arrangement. And of course, we also want the 4 buttons to be aligned perfectly symmetrical within the group. So how do we do that? Simply by selecting all pairs of buttons that are next to each other, either vertically or horizontally, and then align the vertical pairs to the center and the horizontal pairs to the middle. That's how you get that symmetry in there. Now, as the final step in this radio button creation, we want to set these buttons to their default states. That means we need one button that is active. That will be button 1 for now, so we just leave it as it is. For the other 3 buttons, however, that means that they need to be inactive. For the inactive radio button design, we use the same concept like we already did for the settings button and the tab buttons. We want them to have no fill, which we will implement just by setting the fill transparency to 100%. For those who wonder why we don't simply set it to no fill, setting the transparency to 100% has the same visual effect and will it make much easier for us later in the VBA script. For the text color, we simply use the same dark gray that we already used for the settings area titles. Let's do the same adjustments for the other 2 buttons. Now there's only one important step left before we start writing the VBA script. And that is, you probably already know it from the previous tutorials, giving names to all these objects, just to make it easier to reference them later in the VBA script. For that, let's open the selection pane, where all the elements of this worksheet are listed. And we're gonna start by naming the settings button. We just name it, you guessed it right, settings button. And for the settings area, we're gonna save us some work and group all elements that we don't need to reference explicitly in the VBA script. So let's group all these elements here except the radio buttons, and then call that group settings menu frame. And then finally, the 4 buttons. Let's simply call them theme button 1, theme button 2, 3, and 4. And now it is VBA time. Don't panic, we won't skip the toggle buttons, but we want to do this process step by step, so we will add them later on. For now, let's go to the Developer tab and open the Visual Basic editor. In there, we already have the worksheet related script open, so the script that belongs to our dashboard worksheet. In the script, you can already see the code from the previous 2 tutorials for the info buttons and the tab functionality. I already separated them using some line of comments. And down there you see the area in the script that we will use for the VBA code of this tutorial. The first macro that we will code will handle the functionality of the settings menu button. Now, what is the function of this button? Actually pretty easy, just making the settings menu area with all the contents and buttons in it either appear or disappear. We call that sub change settings menu visibility. And start with a with statement saying with active sheet. We use this with statement because all the shapes that we will refer to are in this currently active worksheet. And this with statement basically makes this active sheet our basic reference for all the lines of code in between, so we don't have to repeat it multiple times. We only have this one single macro that will be assigned to the settings menu button. But when we click on this button, how will this macro know what to do, either making the settings menu area appear or disappear? Well, there are multiple properties in our shapes that tell us what the current state is. One of them is the fill transparency of the settings button itself. Maybe you remember that for the inactive button state we set the transparency to 100%. And of course for the active state we will then set it to 0%. That means we can easily write an if statement that checks what the value of this transparency property currently is. If it is 1, which means 100%, that means the settings button is currently inactive and the settings menu area is currently not visible. And thus, since we clicked on the button with that state given, we obviously want the settings menu button to be filled now to represent the active state. That means we reduce the transparency to 0. And we want the settings menu area to be visible, which means we have to set the settings menu frame that we defined to visible equals true. And do the same for the single theme buttons. Else, if the transparency is currently 0 when we click on the settings menu button, we want all these values to be the exact opposite. So we can simply copy it over and change the values accordingly. That's basically all we need for this first macro. Let's assign it to the settings menu button by right-clicking on it and clicking on Assign Macro. There we have all macros available, and of course we select the one we just created, which is the Change Settings Menu Visibility. Okay, let's test it. And as you see, it works perfectly. So let's bring the settings menu area to the position it actually belongs. Beautiful. That means now we can focus on the functionality of the color theme buttons. That is probably something many of you have been waiting for, and it will be pretty awesome. Before we write any script for that, we're gonna create all the alternative theme designs. We do that by duplicating and modifying our basic tile design shape plus the header bar multiple times. That allows us to freely try out different designs and also to easily change designs later on. We start with renaming this current tile design shape into Dashboard Tiles Theme 1. In the same manner, we also rename the header bar into Dashboard Header Theme 1. And to make this handier, we then group both together and just call the group Dashboard Theme 1. So now we can easily duplicate this whole dashboard theme with copy and paste. Every new shape in a worksheet will be added to the front within the visual order of the objects in here. You can easily see that because it is the first element in the selection pane. What we do first with this duplicate, we rename it by changing the 1s into 2s. And then we just drag and drop this group down to the bottom of the selection pane, which makes it go to the back of the visual order. Doesn't really matter if it is in front or behind theme number 1, cause in the end we will only have one of the themes displayed at once. Currently, both color themes are visible, and that makes it a bit difficult to adequately change the design of theme number 2. So what we do is we just set the whole dashboard theme 1 to not visible by clicking on this eye symbol on the right. And now we only have theme number 2 displayed, and we can easily change the theme colors. For that, we right-click on it and go to Format Shape. And in this formatting section, we can then adjust the angle and the colors of this gradient style. It is totally up to you what colors to choose here. I'm just giving you some examples. Some of them might be the better choice, some others might maybe not be the perfect fit right now considering the colors currently used in the charts. So don't judge me for that. But one thing that you should always make sure here is the consistency between header bar and tile design. So these two should always have the same color concept, just like you see here, where we choose the same grading colors for the header bar. We repeat that duplicating process 2 more times. Here for color theme number 3, we change all the 2s into 3s, drag and drop it down there, make the dashboard theme number 2 not visible anymore as well, and then do the redesign for this theme number 3. For this theme we change the angle to 45 degrees, and for the colors we go with violet and a dark blue tone. This time there is no adjustment of the transparency, so it will stay at 0%. And then we do the same for the header bar. Easy as that. And now for the last color theme, we repeat that process 1 more time, rename it, drag and drop it down, make the previous theme invisible, and for this one we will have a 3-color gradient design with black and a dark gray in the middle, and then black again as a 3rd color. I like this one pretty much. It is neutral and it looks clean. We leave the transparency for this one at 0% as well. And then we do the same adjustments for the header bar. Perfect. Well, that's already it for these color theme designs. And as you have already seen, we have full control over the theme selection via these visibility properties again. So that's the way we will make these radio buttons of our settings menu work in our VBA script. Let's get right into it. Just to quickly demonstrate you, when we click on one of these buttons, we want this button to change its design to the active style and make the corresponding color theme shape visible. And for all the other buttons, we want them to change their design to the inactive style and make their corresponding color themes invisible. Let's open the Visual Basic Editor again and write all the subs required for these radio buttons. For the status and design change of the button itself, we need a few lines of code repeatedly in every radio button related macro. So for that reason, it makes sense to write a function that we then can call inside of the button related macros. Let's call that function change radio button status. And as arguments, we have a radio button as an object and a Boolean parameter for the activity state. And then in this function, we start with a with statement referring that radio button object that came as an argument. And then we add an if statement that works based on this active Boolean value. That means if active equals true, then we obviously want the button to change its text color to white. So we code .textframe.characters.font.color equals, and there we provide the RGB object for white with the white color code. And also we set the transparency of that fill to 0% in order to make that fill fully visible. That's our active state button style. And if the active parameter that has been given to this function is false, we simply change the text color to black, which has the RGB code 000. And then of course we set the transparency of the fill to 1, which means 100%. To keep it clear and simple, we're now gonna create one macro per radio button that will be then assigned to that respective button. For the first button, we call the sub display theme 1. In the macro, we start with the with active sheet statement again, and inside of that with statement, we change the dashboard theme visibilities at first. So we write .shapes, then insert the dashboard theme name, .visible equals true for this one. Then we just copy and paste this line, adjust the numbers, and set the Boolean values to false for the other three dashboard themes. And then below that, we want to adjust the button states. For that, we're going to call the function that we just defined above and write call change radio button status. Then we insert the respective button name. In this first line, that is theme button 1, and then set this Boolean parameter to true because we want that button to have the active state design. And for the other three buttons, we call the same function, just have to adjust the numbers and set the Boolean values to false. And that will already do the work for this first button. For the other three buttons, we keep it simple and just copy and paste this macro for now, then adjust the name by changing the number again, and also changing the Boolean true and false values in there accordingly. By the way, for all of you who already have some decent VBA and programming experience, I am well aware that this is a good and working solution, but possibly not the most generic and scalable way to implement this. In the previous tutorials, I already had a few really constructive comments on how to improve and reduce the VBA code that I provided for these custom features. For example, by working with consistent names for the objects, and then just write one single macro that automatically identifies the relevant objects based on the name of the button that has called the macro. I really like that idea. And this is something that is really important to me in general. My main target here is to give you some inspiration with these videos, and then I'm super happy about everyone who takes that code, improves it even further, and then shares it with us, for example, in the comments. That is really wanted from my side, and I think all of us can benefit from such a constructive exchange. Okay, but now for this code, we'll assign these four macros to their respective buttons. So for theme button 1, that will be display theme 1. Then for theme button 2, obviously display theme 2. and so on and so on. And once we have done that, we can test it. And as you see, it works perfectly. Beautiful. We now can easily switch between those different color themes with only one click. And if you want to change one of these designs, it is quite easy as well. Just make it display by using the buttons and then simply change the colors of the currently visible theme design. That's the big advantage we got from using separate shapes for the different color themes instead of only one, because if we only had one color theme, we would have to change the colors in the code, and that makes a potential redesign process way more complicated and less hands-on. That was it for this first group of radio buttons. Now we will start creating these beautiful toggle buttons. Let's get a quick impression again of how they will look once we are done creating them. Simply amazing, and definitely no comparison to any default Excel control element. Just as a quick comment here, for this demonstration the function of these toggle buttons is to control the visibility, or rather availability, of certain dashboard features. And this is just an example. Of course you can use them for anything you want. I think there is a massive amount of opportunities what you could control with them. However, and that's the point, I'm gonna show you the basic approach, and then you can take that and you will only have to replace a few lines of code to implement your own ideas. What we need to do first here is creating the basic shapes and put them together. For that, we insert a rounded rectangle for the toggle button background element. So that's the wider shape that will be positioned behind the circle element. We put the roundness to the maximum again, and afterwards adjust the size to make it a lot smaller. Then we format it, and right now we are designing the active state of the button, so this background shape will have a light green tone and no line. And after that we insert a circle and adjust the size as well. And this circle element will be in front of the other shape, and it will have no line and a darker green as a fill. Let's position it approximately where it belongs in the active button state. And now to give it an even greater look, we're gonna emphasize the front position of this circle by adding a shadow, and then put the whole button construct into its actual position within this white background. And now you see that shadow makes the button look a tiny bit three-dimensional. That is pretty awesome. What we want to add to this button is a dynamic label. For that, we insert a simple text field right next to the button. And for now, let's just make it display the active button state by saying on. For the second toggle button, we select these three elements and duplicate them. And I'm gonna use that second one to show you what the inactive toggle button state will look like. For the inactive button state, we want to have the circle color to be white, and of course it will be placed on the left side of that toggle button background. Now, thanks to the shadow we added, it is still visually differentiable from the white settings menu background. And for the toggle button background element, we set the fill color to a light gray. Beautiful. And in the active state, of course, this text field will display off instead of on. Now, what is left to do is the alignment of the upper and lower toggle button group so that they are perfectly aligned vertically. Now that we have successfully created these beautiful toggle button designs, let's spend a few seconds on naming these elements again as a preparation for the VBA script. For each toggle button, we have to name all three shapes individually, since we're gonna reference each of them separately in the VBA script. Since this first toggle button will control the visibility of the tab functionality, we're gonna call this first toggle button background toggle background tabs. The circle will be called toggle circle tabs, and the label will be called toggle text box tabs. That's just a whole bunch of T's there. And in the same manner we choose the names for these elements of the other toggle button that will control the info button visibility. Perfect. Now we are set and ready to write the required VBA script for these toggle buttons. So let's open the VBA editor. And before we write the macro that will be connected to the toggle button itself, we have to make sure that these toggle buttons are included in the settings button script in order to make them appear and disappear when we click on the settings button, just like the other elements of the settings menu already do. So in the script, let's scroll down to the settings button code, and in there we already see the commands to let the frame and the group of theme buttons appear. So let's just add the respective commands for the toggle button elements below. First for the toggle background info element. Then we simply copy and adjust this for the other two. And then we do the same for the second toggle button. And to make them also disappear together with all the other elements, we can use the same lines of code, insert them right here, and simply change the Boolean values into false. So now the settings button in the header bar has full control over all elements, including these toggle buttons. That was the first step. And now, of course, we want to give these toggle buttons some functionality, so we need some VBA code for that. When we click on these toggle buttons, we want them to change their visual appearance, which includes a change of fill colors, but also a change of this toggle circle's position. And we also want them to change the visibility of the tab functionality and info buttons. And that includes, when we make them disappear, we also want to reset these elements into a defined default state. You'll see what that means exactly later on. Just like for the theme color radio buttons, we're gonna write a function to implement the toggle button visual behavior. That means make the toggle button switch between the active and inactive state designs that I just created. The additional challenge we have with these toggle buttons is that we not only want them to have a change of fill colors, but also a change of this toggle circle's position. That means we need to implement some sort of element movement or animation here. We're gonna call that function change toggle button status. And it will have 4 arguments, one for each toggle button element, and one Boolean parameter for the activation state. In that function, we're gonna define an if statement based on if that active parameter is true or false. Let's start with the true case, which will only be executed if the button is in the inactive state when we click on it. So we want the toggle button to switch into the active visual state, and we're gonna start with the trickiest part, which is the toggle circle. For that one, we're gonna change the fill color to that dark green, which is easy because we already did it before for other elements, so we know how to do that. The only thing I had to look up is the exact color code for that green. But we also have to make it move to the right. How do we do that? It is actually pretty easy, because each shape has properties that describe the current position, and the left property is responsible for the horizontal position. The value itself describes the horizontal coordinates of a shape in a worksheet. So just like for the x-axis in a chart, if we increase that value, the shape will move to the right. I already tested the exact amount of points we need to move to the right. It is around 17 points. And since we don't want to work with absolute positions here, we just define the new position relative to the current position. So we set our left property to the current left value plus 17. Of course, this number is fully dependent on how big and wide you designed your toggle button background element. And yeah, that's the trick for making objects move in Excel VBA. The second element to change is the toggle button background shape, for which we set the fill color to this light green. And then we also want to change the text in the toggle text box to on. We can access the text content by writing .textFrame, .characters, .text equals on in that case. For the else case, we just copy the code over and adjust the assigned values. Since we want to switch into the active visual button state, we set the circle fill to white, make the button move 17 points to the left, so we need a minus instead of a plus. Then we change that light green into the light gray, And we set the label text to off. That's already it for this function. And that allows us to write the two macros which will make use of that function and will be directly assigned to the toggle buttons. We start with the macro for the info visibility toggle button. So let's call that macro change info visibility. We reference the active sheet in a with statement, and inside of that with statement we write an if clause that checks if the circle fill of that info toggle button is currently white. And if that's the case, that means the button is currently set to inactive. And for that reason, we want to set it to active and make the info box and info button, which are the elements we control with this toggle button, visible. So we set the info button deliveries to visible equals true. And we also want to make sure that the info button is reset to its default state when being displayed. So we set the fill color to white. I'm quickly gonna show you what I mean by that. Let's assume we have that info button active with the info box displayed, and then we use the toggle button to make it all disappear. When we then click on the toggle button again to make it reappear, we don't want the info box to be displayed as well, but only the info button in its inactive white state like this. So for the script, that means we also have to explicitly set the info box deliveries to visible equals false. For the toggle button's visual status, we call the function that we defined above. And just pass the toggle button elements as parameters just as required. And we set the Boolean parameter to true. This will transform the visual appearance of this toggle button to the active state design. And then for the else case, which is executed if the toggle button circle is not white but green, which means when we click on the button it is currently active and we want to set it to inactive. We just copy over the code from above and adjust the values accordingly. For this scenario, we can delete the second command for the info button, because we will set it to not visible and then it doesn't matter what color it has. So we can also get rid of that with statement and just set visible to false. The next command has to stay the same. And for the toggle button visual status, we simply change the true to false to make it transform into the inactive visual state. Now that was a lot of coding without actually seeing any results, so I don't want to have you wait any longer and just run the macro we just created. Let's go to the list of macros in this worksheet, and there we see it, change info visibility. Let's run it. Oh, got a compile error there. Oh yeah, I see. I mistakenly referenced the shape names when I called the function, but actually I have to reference a shape with that name. So let's quickly fix that shape reference around the names. That was a rookie mistake, but sometimes it happens. Let's try it out again by directly running the macro. And now it runs through without any error. The toggle button changed its state to active. The info button was still visible, so there was no change in this first run. But now if we run the macro again, the toggle button is transformed back to the inactive state correctly, and the info button disappeared. Beautiful. That is what we want. So let's finish that process by assigning the macro directly to that toggle button. We're gonna assign it to both shapes, the circle and the background shape. And now we have a fully functional toggle button that is actually able to do something. Just to show you that reset to the default state in action, let's click on that info button to make the info box appear. Now the info button becomes yellow. And if we turn that visibility off and on again, we just want that info button to be reset to that inactive state. And that is exactly what happens. Wonderful. For the other toggle button that controls the visibility or availability of tabs, it will be pretty easy now, as we have already done a big part of the work by defining the visual behavior of toggle buttons in general in that function. So we mainly have to focus on the elements this toggle button controls, which are the two tabs. What we want to happen here is, we want to define the primary revenue tab as the default tab. That means when we set this tab visibility to off, we want that tile to always be reset to displaying the revenue charts. So if the unit tab is currently selected and we turn the tabs functionality off, we want to switch back to the revenue view. And then when it is turned on again, we want the revenue tab to still be the active tab. So there we have another form of reset into a default state. Let's get back to the script and write a macro for that, which we will call change tabs visibility. I will just put the reset rules here as a comment so we don't forget it. Just like in the other toggle button macro, we start with the with statement to reference the active sheet. And put an if clause inside of it to check if the toggle circle fill color is white. If it is white, we are in the inactive state and we want the state to become active, which means making the tab buttons and tab contents available. We simply make both tab buttons visible in the tile. Let's just make sure the name is correct by looking it up in the selection pane. Yes, it is. So we can add the same command for the second tab button. Now, to ensure that the tab buttons are still reset to the default state, we have to set the design of the sales revenue tab button to a black text color and 0 fill transparency, which means the white fill is fully displayed. And for the Units tab button, we set the text color to white and the transparency to 1, which is 100%. For the tab content, we set both sales revenue charts to visible equals true and both sales unit charts to visible equals false. Now, these 4 lines of code for the tab content will also be repeated in the else part, just like that, so technically we don't need them here, but just in case someone plays around with the visibility of elements, for example in the selection pane, I will put these 4 lines in here as well, just to make sure the correct content is displayed. And for the toggle button's visual status, we call the respective function, pass the toggle button elements, and true for the active parameter. And then for the else case, we copy all these commands over again. We can get rid of these text color and visible commands as we're gonna set these elements to visible equals false anyway. But we have to leave these commands for the tab contents just like they are. And change the boolean value in the toggle button status function from true to false. Oh, I see, again I directly referenced the shape names here in the function call, but we have to put the actual shape references in there. So let me quickly fix that as the final step in here before we get any errors again. Perfect. Seems like we finished that final macro successfully as well. Let's finally assign it to that toggle button. So the toggle circle and the toggle background element. And then we are ready to test it. And it seems to work perfectly on that operation. Also works when we set it to active again. And then we also test the resetting case, so if it resets successfully to our defined default state, let's go to the Units tab, then we click on the toggle button to set it to off. Now I close the whole settings menu just for a second to check the scale of the charts, and as you see, just like we defined, the tab has been reset to the revenue charts again. And if we turn it on again, the revenue tab is still the active tab. Beautiful! Now all use cases that we wanted to cover in this custom interactive settings menu work perfectly. And that's already it for this tutorial. I hope you got some good inspirations from this one and enjoyed it as much as I did. You will find the whole code on excelfind.com, linked below in the description. Go check it out, Apply it to your own dashboards or also other projects, and again let me know in the comments what you used this for and maybe how you adjusted, improved or extended this idea and the respective code. If you like this tutorial, don't forget to leave a thumbs up and share this video, and of course subscribe for more awesome and modern Excel and PowerPoint content. I wish you a beautiful day and see you next time. Cheers!